In this video we're going to look at two different things. Firstly, the third and final kind of regular verb in Spanish, a regular ER verb, such as aprender, to learn. So, aprendo, I learn. And the second thing we're going to come on and look at is a different kind of verb that is not a completely irregular verb, but nor is it a completely regular verb. It's a kind of verb called a radical changing, or sometimes a stem changing verb. And we'll meet two examples of this: the verb pensar, to think. There is pienso, I think, and the verb preferir, to prefer. Here is prefiero, I prefer. Before we meet our regular ER verb, aprender, we're just going to have a quick recap of the first two kinds of regular verb we met in Spanish. We met, as a first conjugation, regular AR verbs such as hablar. And you probably remember that the endings for those verbs are, as we can see on the left here, hablo, hablas, habla, hablamos, habláis, hablan. You're probably also familiar by now with the idea that as each of these endings in turn is different from all the other ones, we rarely need to use a word here for I or you or he, she, it, etc. The ending of the verb makes it exactly clear who is doing the speaking. The second conjugation of verbs that we met were regular IR verbs, such as vivir, to live. And you will, I'm sure, remember that the conjugation of that is as follows: vivo, vives, vive. The vowel changes now: vivimos, vivís, viven. It changes back again to an E. So here then is, or are two examples of the third conjugation that we have met, the regular ER verbs in Spanish. That's new in this video. And here we have an example of aprender, to learn. This verb is conjugated as follows then, in the singular: aprendo, aprendes, aprende. You'll notice that that is exactly the same as the endings for the singular of a regular IR verb, such as vivir, which would have been vivo, vives, vive. There is a slight difference when we go into the plural, though. The nosotros form, the we form, is aprendemos, and the vosotros form, the you plural form, aprendéis. The ellos, or ellas, they form is aprenden. So we can see then that it is only in the nosotros and vosotros forms, the we and you plural forms, that an ER verb has different endings from a regular IR verb, where vivir would have vivimos, aprender has aprendemos, where vivir would have vivís, aprender has aprendéis. But the singular endings, OESE, and the third person plural are exactly the same as the IR verbs. There's another example here of the verb creer. I've got a slight glitch in my presentation here. This should, of course, be creer, C-R-E-E-R, as the infinitive to believe. This is a regular ER verb, although it's sometimes a little bit confusing because the stem ends in an E, so we get what looks like a kind of irregularity, a double E here: crees, cree, creemos, creéis, creyen. But it is in fact a very common regular ER verb, creer. And the final thing in today's video is the topic of radical changing verbs, or stem changing verbs, they're sometimes called. The verb The word radical originates from the Latin word radex, which means a root. So a radical solution, something is a solution that tackles it at its root, at its heart. And these verbs are called radical changing verbs because they change in their roots, that's to say in their stems, not just in their endings. If we look closely at these two verbs, pensar and preferir, particularly focusing on their endings, o, as, a, amos, ais, an, and for an IR verb, preferir, o, es, e, imos, is, en, we'll notice that these are completely regular. The endings of pensar are just the same as the endings of hablar. The endings of preferir are just the same as the endings of vivir. However, there is a change in the stem, in the singular of both of these verbs. The vowel in the syllable before the ending, in this case here the E of pensar, in this case here the E between the F and the R of preferir, that vowel changes. It's the vowel in the stem and it changes when we conjugate the verb. That's why they're called stem changing or radical changing verbs. So we notice that the singular of pensar changes in the I form from pensar to pienso, and in the you singular form to piensas, and in the he, she, it form to piensa. So in each of the singular forms, the E has changed to an IE. That's why this kind of verb is often known as an E to IE radical changing verb. Exactly the same pattern can be observed in the singular of preferir. The E here has changed to an IE, so we get prefiero, prefieres, prefiere. When we move into the nosotros and vosotros forms of both these verbs, we'll see that the vowel that radical changed in the stem of the singular returns to the same form that it had in the infinitive. So the E of pensar is also there just as an E in pensamos and pensáis. Similarly with preferir, the E here between the F and R has returned in preferimos and preferís. When we get into the final person, the third person plural, down here, the they form of the verb, we'll notice that the radical changing vowel has returned as it was in the singular. So the E changes to an IE. Piensan, they think. Prefieren, they prefer. These verbs are sometimes known then as 1, 2, 3, 6 verbs, because the first, second, third, and third plural, sixth person, if you like, changes the vowel in the stem, whereas the first person and second person plural retains the same vowel that we had in the infinitive.